Hello, London. Whew. Okay, it's a little bit tough to follow Queen, but I think, I think we'll do a good job.
I hope so, yeah.
I hope so. Welcome to ETHLondon.
Woo!
I'm Simona.
I'm Kartik.
And welcome, everyone.
Welcome to London.
Welcome to London. So, is the clicker not working? Never mind. So this is the very first hackathon, ETHGlobal hackathon in the UK. And we are super, super excited to hold it in London, in this beautiful venue. I know a lot of you have traveled from far and wide, some a little bit further than others. Personally, this is the hackathon that I have traveled the least for. I live down in Brighton, so I took the train. I'm very green today and will be tomorrow and on Sunday. Kartik, on the other hand, has traveled a little bit longer. Are you a little bit jet lagged?
A little bit.
Just a little bit. So your task, aside all the hacking and all of the other cool stuff, is if you see Kartik without a coffee or an energy drink, it is your job to provide him with one. Literally, the future of ETHGlobal depends on it. So please, if you see him without energy or coffee, provide him with some.
She's not kidding.
I am not. I'm not. He's dozed off a few times. No, I'm joking. Great. So we are here. There's about 300 of us. I think there's more arriving for tomorrow and Sunday. We love seeing the advanced and intermediate hackers coming here and hopefully building some incredible stuff. But I'm particularly excited about the beginners and new to Ethereum people that we have here today. I was in a workshop, an intro to Web3 workshop this morning, which was awesome. And we went through a lot of the basic concepts. And hopefully that will help everybody have a really, really good hackathon and produce some really cool stuff. So, yes. Woo. So, over 20 countries represented here. Again, thank you so much for everybody who traveled, who dared to travel with all the news about all sorts of viruses and all of that jazz. But you are all good. We're here, and we're going to have an awesome weekend. And because I mentioned a lot of people are from around here, we actually have 65% are from London. Woo! Oh, there's London. You could have done better on the We Will Rock You for Queen. Come on, guys. Okay. So we have over 20 companies who are sponsoring this event, which is, again, great to see. We have 13 TED Talks, which are not tech, which are gonna happen tomorrow and on Sunday. We have 8 workshops all happening today. We've already had some. They will continue this evening, and they are all literally get out of here, go left. If you have trouble, ask the guys at the front desk. They will guide you and help you out. We also have over 30,000 Great British pounds in prizes. That's over...
That's like $100,000 US or something.
That's like a lot of money. Yeah. So that is a lot of money right there. And we also have our wonderful mentors. We've got mentors for DeFi, for UX, for privacy, for gaming, literally everything that you need. So ask them everything, ask them anything. They will be able to help you. And also, maybe not help you with some hacking tips, but tomorrow we have an awesome fireside with Vitalik and Joe that will happen on this stage right here at noon, which is 12 p.m. You'll also be able to ask them a lot of questions if you have burning questions that you want to ask them, and I'll show you how you join our community so that you can ask these questions and hopefully get your answers.
That's tomorrow. So I'm going to figure out how this clicker works. And, well, we're super excited to kind of be in ETHLondon. ETHLondon is an ETHGlobal event. The thing that excites me more, and every time when I go on stage and talk about ETHGlobal, is that every time there's a new set of audience that I have to speak to, and they don't know what ETHGlobal is, and that is the best part. Because the goal of ETHGlobal is to get new developers into the Web3 ecosystem, and the more new faces we see, the better it is, because we think that is us being successful at our goal. So ETHGlobal events are these events, we do these around the world. They contain, okay, well, that's a,
Glitch in the matrix.
that is a glitch in the matrix. Oh, never mind, it's the transitions. So what actually, the template of each of our events is that these are hackathons, and we don't section them off as anywhere from tracks to specific problems you're solving. You get to build whatever you want. We want you to have the creative freedom to build anything that you like, whether it's interesting to you at the time or something you've been thinking about. You get to do this. These are opportunities for you to learn, mentor, and grow. This is about understanding what's possible in this ecosystem. So a lot of this is about being able to find the people who are working on these similar things with you, getting help from them. There's tons of mentors out here available anywhere from in-person to Discord. And if you're ever stuck or if you want to learn something about a technology, you can probably find the person who invented it in this room. And that's what makes it amazing. This is entirely for the ecosystem. These are not contests. These are not events where you have to compete for a specific prize. These are pure opportunities for you to learn. And kind of just say this again, this is a hackathon, not a conference. Way less emphasis on more talks. This is about building, showing what you're doing, and to kind of continue with that theme, we prefer showcasing over telling. So even if you're working on a project this weekend and you don't get to make it work or get it to be in the final form that you want it to be, you should still present to the judges, because it's about progress, not about having a polished product. And we really care about you getting better at building and getting closer to what you want to build. So we've done these events all across the world, and this is why we're here in the UK. And these events include anywhere from having talks and workshops to opportunities to talk to the people in this space that are making this ecosystem better, from anywhere from New York to Cape Town to India to San Francisco. These events let thousands of people come into this space. Since the beginning of ETHGlobal, over the past 18 months, we've had over 10,000 people at these events. We've seen over 1,000 projects and hosted people from over 75 countries. And this is what makes this community great and diverse and really cool, because they experiment and build all these projects. Some of them you've heard of, anywhere from Instadap to CryptoKitties to Set Protocol to One Inch Exchange. All these have come out of these hackathons in the past. And we can't wait to see what all of you build, because these are opportunities for you to dream big, and we want to be there to help you achieve that. So I'm super excited to see what comes out of ETH London on Sunday, and let's move on to the rest of the show. So with that, I want to call actually two people from this community, Josh Stark and Evan Van Ness, who will come here and go over this new segment we want to add to all of our events, and it's called The Year in Ethereum So Far. And Josh and Evan will sum up what's happened in this ecosystem in a handful of slides and tell you what's actually exciting. So with that, please welcome Josh and Evan on stage. Woo!
Hey everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you, Kartik, for the kind introduction. I'm Josh. I'm one of the co-founders of ETHGlobal, and in my spare time, when I have it, I write a blog post, one blog post a year with Evan.
And it takes about the whole year, so
yeah. And
it's
Evan,
a joke between us, because we take so much time at it.
And Evan, you obviously know from theweekendethereumnews.com, a popular newsletter that I'm sure all of you already subscribe to. So what we thought we'd do here is just rather than wait till January 2021, let's update the community more often about just a few cool things that have happened already this year. So we just picked 6 things to kind of throw out there that we thought would be interesting to you in this building. So let's get started. Number 1, in no particular order, and Evan, you've got the clicker. Number 1, so a lot of you probably know this already, but the total value locked in DeFi crossed 1 billion, I believe on February 7th, which is an incredible accomplishment for an ecosystem that barely existed a couple of years ago. For those of you who don't know, DeFi refers to decentralized finance, and it is the term we use to refer to many different financial applications built on Ethereum. So things like decentralized exchanges, stable coins, ways to trade your crypto crypto or leverage it, lending protocols, insurance protocols, and much, much more. And the total value locked in it, all that means is there's all these assets that might serve as collateral or liquidity pools that exist inside these applications. And today it's a little less than $1 billion, but it did cross $1 billion already this year. Number two, the Ecosystem Support Program launched this amazing wish list, and this is particularly relevant to the hackers and builders in this room. Ecosystem Support is a program by the Ethereum Foundation to provide financial and other support to projects across the ecosystem. And there's now a wish list of things that the EF would love to see people building. So if you're curious about how to get engaged in the Ethereum ecosystem, check out this list and learn more about what you could work on. I should note, too, that all these links will be posted in the official Discord later, so you'll be able to find them. Number three, ETH Denver happened. Some of you I know were even there. It was an amazing event with over 1,000 people at it, and a lot of great stuff got built. If you are still thinking about what to build this weekend and want ideas, check out their blog post with the winners and also their blog post with every single submission from the hackathon. It might be a great way to build on top of the work that's already been done. And now I'll turn over to Evan.
Yeah, so Spencer Dinwiddie, who is a guard for the New Jersey Nets, he tokenized his contract on Ethereum. There's some pretty cool stories there. The team was doing something else before they got into doing this. And also, like, the NBA tried to fight him, and he kept pushing forward and eventually got it to a place where he could do it. So it is something that is only open to accredited investors, but it was a very cool way of seeing a real world person who's famous outside of crypto getting into tokenizing things on Ethereum. So we also saw flash loans, which was very exciting and maybe a little too exciting, especially if you hold DAI. We've seen, so a flash loan basically is within one block, the idea that you can basically get a loan from somebody and pay a small amount as long as you pay it back within that same block, that same transaction. So the atomicity is there. So there's a lot of things you can do when all of a sudden capital is not a constraint. And I've seen people say things like, it's the democratization of, being a whale or of being rich and being able to do things like latency arb. So that's really neat, and it unlocks a lot of different things, like having to have a governance security module in Maker. So, and then there's a lot of stuff that's already launched this year. I think calling out a few that are just here as well. Aztec, of course, launched confidential transactions on mainnet. That's super cool. They're in the back at the table there if you want to talk to them. Another couple other things is Set came out of one of the ETHGlobal events. Loopring launched the first ZK Stark rollup, which is super cool. They actually, on their exchange, which is a trustless layer 2, they're doing thousands of transactions per second. So there is a, scalability is starting to really be here in blockchains. And then, there's also stuff like R-trees, which is really cool, which is just using your DAI in Compound. You can plant trays using the interest from your DAI that is locked in DeFi. And if you don't know what any of these terms are, I've failed to explain them, and I'm sorry, but you can come ask me about them, and I'd be happy to talk to you.
And if you want to find out what happened last year, please read the blog post that we spent 1,000 hours writing. Again, the link will be in Discord afterwards. And with that, we'll just kind of wrap up. Just the last slide. All the links, again, will be in the chat. And if you want to keep up with Ethereum, subscribe to Evan's awesome newsletter. He's very unwilling to shill it, so I will. It is the best, most granular way to keep up with, especially technical developments in Ethereum. It's incredible. Go sign up right now. I want him to tell me later that he had a real bump from this evening. So thank you for everyone. I hope you have a great time this weekend. Happy hacking.
Thank you, Evan and Josh. I'll say it again. Weekend Ethereum, the best update on this ecosystem. Please subscribe because he won't tell you to. Next up, we have a couple of sponsors who want to share what they're doing and sort of tell you about exactly why they're here, what they do, what they want to actually contribute to this ecosystem, and just generally support everybody that's here from a mentorship, from an SDK and their tool standpoint. And I want to start inviting them on stage to kind of share those words. So with that, speaking of Flash Loans, I want to call up Jordan from Aave to tell you a bit about Aave and what they're up to. Please welcome Jordan on stage.
Hey guys. Hey, so I have 3 minutes. I will try to be quick. If you're not familiar with Aave, besides Flash Loans, we do simple borrowing and lending, allowing you to earn on your assets or to leverage your long positions. But to present the price of this weekend, this will be quite nice. We have a 2,500 ADI we have a 2,500 ADI prices for the coolest hack on Aave. And the cool thing is that it's actually in ADI, and ADI is our token when you deposit in Aave, and we just deposited. So by the end of the weekend, actually, you will earn at the current rate in DeFi of 8% on DAI. That will make you $1 more by the end of the weekend, and you can keep it in the protocol to keep earning. So it's quite nice. We have also swags, special swag for hackers, and we have open swag for everyone at the booth. But beside the prices, like what is interesting if you want to hack on Aave? We try to help you with many things. We have a quite cool documentation. We have also a large community of open source contributor. The protocol is all open source. Everything we do is open source and public. And actually, if we like what you build, or if you want to continue building on an ecosystem, there is possibility that we help you to get funding, or that we give some small grants just to support your work. Actually, we have here within the room people who already built on Aave. But actually, beside that, we will help you in marketing, branding, swag, like I said, and love, support, therapy, like we all need it in Ethereum. But maybe something that we are the strongest at it. We can do memes for you. So fine, but her breath is like, she says she wanna dance, but she don't know how to. I'm iced out, ooh, looking like a star. Her name is Jenny, ooh, bitch don't have no panties. I'm Steph Curry. So this is actually the flow of collateralswap.com. David was here in the, I don't know, David, are you here? Yeah, David is here. He built collateral swap. Basically, that allows you to change the long position into your Maker vault. Let's say that you were a long BAT in your vault, and within one transaction, you can be long ETH, and without having the capital needed to close your position. So it's actually quite nice. You can do a lot of things with Flash Loan within one transaction. But we will make memes for you to reach out higher audience. If you want to learn more about Flash Loan, we have a talk tonight at 9. Emilio, Ernesto, and Andre, who are somewhere in the room, will speak and give a more technical presentation on what you can do with Flash Loan. And we also have another talk tomorrow at 2 on composability within DeFi with Aave. And actually, this is what hackathon are. It's not just like technical composability. It's like human composability. You are going to make teams. You don't know all each other. So this is all about what this weekend is. And if you need help, this is our Telegram. If you need to contact us during the weekend, if you have more need for technical help, you have here some of the devs, and you have Stani, the CEO, Irene, which is in business, and me, head of the operation. If you need anything, feedback, well, we are all pretty multitask, so even technical, you can ask. Trying to be quick, so respecting that. Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. I'm super excited to hear about what Flash Loans can do and what all of you hack on with Flash Loans. Next up, I want to call Tom from Aztec, and Tom's going to tell you about what Aztec is and how you can use them for your hacks. Please welcome Tom on stage.
Hi, well, welcome to London. This is Brexit era Britain, so we can't afford a slideshow. I'm going to give you a 30-second intro to the Aztec protocol. As you may be aware, and as Evan just said, we launched on Brexit Day, 31st of January. That certainly wasn't deliberate. We currently handle confidential transactions, but we're a privacy network with much greater aspirations than that. So at the moment, you can do ZK DAI. You can integrate that right now into your dApps, and we certainly hope to see lots of those over the course of the next couple of days. We're then going to be introducing later in the year user privacy, so we get rid of the transaction graph, and then finally code privacy and scalable privacy towards the end of the year. So that's our roadmap. We have a great SDK, so please come and speak to us. There are going to be lots of Aztec representatives because we're on home turf here. So come to us about that. We've got 2,000 ZK DAI as a prize pot, and a particularly good prizes on offer if you integrate to mainnet. And we're also just going to be giving out 1,000 ZK DAI. We're feeling very generous. So please come and see us, and we'll give you some slips which have some random amounts of ZK DAI, some of them as much as $50, which is a lot of money these days. Anyway, thanks. Please come and see us. We're right at the back, and look forward to meeting you all over the course of the weekend. Thanks.
Tom, I need the mic. Thank you, Tom from Aztec.
Thank you. Okay, now I have my microphone back. I feel better. Okay, so thank you so much, Aztec and Aave. But of course, they are not the only sponsors, because as I mentioned before, there are many others making this possible. And what I want you to do now, because you didn't do great on the Queen thing, I don't hold a grudge, but maybe a tiny one. I want you for the next 4 slides to start clapping and not stop. So, everybody, let's show them love. So, Peepo, Starkware, Diversify, Orchid, Consensus, Liquidity Network, Aztec, ENS, Bidler, 1KX, Taurus, MetaPresent, DApp Hero, Pillar, AWS, Infura, Kickback, Acropolis, Endorse, DeFi Prime, KCL Blockchain, and the Ethereum London Meetup Group. Woo! Yes, London, yes, there we go.
Without your support, these events would literally not be possible, and it's not just about kind of being here or anything financial. It's about actually being here, being part of the team, and making us, helping us make this event better by giving all of your support and time to the rest of the hackers, and that's what makes this is amazing. So thank you from the bottom of our heart. We want to move on to kind of the main part of this ceremony, and that is our keynote address. And a lot of you are new to the Ethereum ecosystem, and a lot of you are super familiar with this and have kind of been in anywhere from previous ETHGlobal events to other events in the space that are around the Web3 topic. And what makes this super unique as an ecosystem is that it is an open, permissionless platform, and not just from like a technical side. It's the fact that anybody can come in from any background and start contributing. Oftentimes, there's a discovery process, a process to understand what's going on, how do I best contribute. But largely, it is one of the only ecosystems that are out there, not just about crypto, not just a technical thing, just in overall, that is ready to accept audiences from anywhere from research to development to marketing to like you name it, any category. But how do we actually make better use of anywhere from guiding people to contribute better to understanding how do we highlight what these problems are that are worth solving or focusing on? Can we do that? Can we do a better job at that? And to sort of share some of these thoughts on this topic, I want to actually call up Albert Nee from the Ethereum Foundation, who is conveniently going to give his talk on Ethereum from multiple angles. And with that, please welcome Albert Nee on stage. And I'll leave this with you.
Do I use this, or do these work? Do these work? Okay. Cool. Hey, everybody. Thanks a ton for coming. As Kartik said, my talk today will be about Ethereum from multiple perspectives. But first, who am I? Well, my name's Albert, and the most important thing you should know about me is that I am really jet-lagged right now. There's a few other things that may be worth knowing. You know, I studied math and CS. I had a pretty cool startup experience, and that led to other learning experiences, and eventually led me to work and help the Ethereum Foundation today. Now for today's talk, for those of you who saw my talk at ETH Boston, The first half of this talk is mostly a redux of that. I've tinkered with some parts. And the second half, I'm excited to present some new concepts and tie-ins with ETHLondon. So the fundamental premise of this talk is that in order to improve our understanding of complex topics, we should consider a wide variety of perspectives. This doesn't guarantee that we'll have enough understanding. You know, one of the tricky things about power laws is that you can get 99 things right, but the 100th thing you missed might dominate everything else. But considering more perspectives also increases the chances that we hit on the most important thing. Now, one of the most complex topics is forecasting the future. And one lens for thinking about the future is to look at the past. After all, we are in the future compared to the past. So to start, I collected some quotes about the internet back from the 1990s. Oops. So this first quote is from Robert Metcalfe, 1995, the inventor of Ethernet, which has nothing to do with Ethereum. It's kind of an ironic quote if you think about both the timing and this particular technology that has been vital to the adoption of the internet. This next quote says something that I think is pretty reasonable. It says that most things that succeed don't require retraining 250 million people. Of course, we know that it's now much, much more than that. Then we have another quote about all these promises of what the internet is going to bring, you know, airline tickets, restaurant reservations, sales contracts. And of course, it makes this note that the local mall still does more business in an afternoon than the entire internet handles in a month. That might sound familiar to some of you in Ethereum land. Lastly, we have this somewhat infamous quote about the internet's impact on the economy versus the fax machine. And I almost felt bad including this because I believe the context for this quote was actually to make a somewhat contrarian statement at the time. So I do think it's important to put some of these things in the appropriate context. The other important context to put here is I'm not trying to actually compare Ethereum or blockchain to like be the next internet. I think doing that would be similar to the type of mistakes that these quotes made. Now, the moment that we start thinking we know what's going to happen, it's also the moment that we're at the highest risk. And so that's why in almost all of my talks, I like to cite the parable of the blind men and the elephant. Most of you probably heard this parable or some form of it. In the story, there's multiple blind men. They're touching different parts of an elephant for whatever reason. And since they each have an incomplete picture, they make different and incorrect assumptions about the object they're touching. So it's obvious that the blind men are making a mistake with their statements in this picture. But there's actually two bigger mistakes going on. First, they aren't considering that they're directly interfacing with something that like may be much bigger than what's there that they're able to experience. Second, they aren't communicating with each other. Now, I won't fault somebody for being blind, that's out of your control, but given that they're talking, I don't think they're deaf, so this part I think is on them. That's why when trying to grok Ethereum, or anything big and complex, I think it's important to take multiple perspectives and communicate about them. We'll end up with a better picture, even if it's not perfect, and that's the goal of this talk as well, to improve our picture, or at least an expectation improve it, by looking at Ethereum from different perspectives. And so the first perspective is history. I don't mean blockchain history or cryptography history or digital cash history. Those are important, but I'm going to zoom even further out. Now, unlike the first four quotes, which had to be broadcast via newspapers, magazine articles, or recorded presentations, I got this quote directly via Twitter. As a tangent, I still think about this sometimes. I grew up in the Chicago area. I was a big sports fan. And back in 1995, Michael Jordan announced he was coming out of retirement to return to basketball. If the internet was a big thing back then, this announcement undoubtedly would have broken it. But instead, MJ had to send a fax to various newspapers and TV stations so that they could announce it. In other words, one of the most famous people on earth couldn't make an announcement directly because the technology essentially didn't exist. It does make you wonder what dynamics might exist 25 years from now, especially in light of efforts like Twitter's Blue Sky decentralized social media protocol and all the other things that I'm sure will be explored between now and then. So back on topic, a type of thought experiment I've always liked is imagining what it must have been like to be at certain points in history. Here, that point in history is typing on a keyboard attached to a computer terminal. Now, the funny thing is, when you actually walk through this thought experiment, you realize that without the benefit of hindsight, the reaction might not have been that positive. You might go, well, okay, you're typing and it's showing up, but I've already been able to do that with this typewriter, and that's been around forever. Another lens that I take is thinking about moving data around and how much that's changed over the years. Most people in this room probably haven't even used most of the technologies on this list. I know for me, I had some experience with floppy disks and CD-ROMs, but I never interacted with a Memorex 8-inch floppy, for instance. Another story that I like to tell is how back in 1989, my parents spent $600 to buy a 20 megabyte hard drive. I've joked before that it's still way cheaper than storing that amount of data on Ethereum, but I do wonder about the parents out there who might be utilizing Ethereum today, in spite of its limitations, just as my parents did for me, and something that I'm forever grateful for. So another lens with which to view history is to identify places where imitation occurred. As the saying goes, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And it gets especially interesting when it occurs in situations that otherwise don't make sense, because in a way that gives you more precision into the thought process at the time than anything else. My standard example of this is the history of JavaScript. As some of you may know, JavaScript was originally named Mocha, and then it was renamed to JavaScript because of Java's popularity, something that confuses people to this very day, as the two languages, while having some overlaps, are really very, very different. Of course, JavaScript has long since overtaken Java as the most popular and widely used programming language in the world. Ethereum has its own interesting parallel in Solidity. Solidity was built to interface with the Ethereum virtual machine, and its syntax was at least partly motivated by JavaScript's due to JavaScript's popularity. That said, I think coding in Solidity is probably better thought of as akin to writing bash scripts than it is to using JavaScript. You know, JavaScript's often in a context, such as a front-end context, where you can get away with certain mistakes or other issues with what you're building, something that is a lot less true for Solidity. And while we're at it, there's this fun fact that, you know, the creator of JavaScript now works on the Brave browser. The Brave browser was funded by an Ethereum token, and as I noted at the beginning of this section, history might not repeat, but it does seem to rhyme. Another rhyme that I enjoy digging into is that of performance optimization. So I remember when I was in school, there was this discussion that some would have about how important performance optimization even was anymore. There was a time where it seemed like computers just kept getting faster, and that any improvement in performance optimization skill would be dominated by improvements in the speed of computers as a whole. Of course, what happened next was the smartphone revolution occurred, and all of a sudden everyone had this slower computer and slower internet connection again. And so, of course, performance engineering started to matter in that context. Then we had blockchains, where performance optimization matters even more. And really, I think that the takeaway is that we'll always have more use for computing power. I expect to see things like homomorphically encrypted computing become more popular and more common as we continue to improve those technologies and as we continue to have faster computers. After all, the goal was never just to be able to do computation. So that leads me to the next perspective I want to take, which is engineering. One thing that I found really interesting about the last 10 years, and really the last 30, but especially in the last 10 years, is how software engineering has changed. I had this really fun conversation with this 20-year-old who remarked about the blockchain, and Ethereum specifically, that it seemed impossible to have to write code that you couldn't change afterward. I then introduced this person to the CD-ROM and talked through how once upon a time, in a galaxy far, far away, you actually had to ship software on these fairly immutable devices. Most people didn't even have the internet, and so you actually had a very similar dynamic where you pretty much had one main shot to get things right. What's cool, though, is that software engineering companies have become increasingly safe coding environments. You know, coding schools become much more common. People can often learn to code for 3 to 6 months and start to contribute, and it's really great because it just greatly increased the accessibility of software engineering. I remember one of the hardest things for me when I was working at Dropbox was that I knew that it was possible to ship a bug that killed the company. You know, as a file syncing program, if you lose someone's files, it doesn't matter if you can patch the bug afterward. And we see some similar aspects with blockchain engineering. It is currently a pretty unsafe coding environment. One way I like to think about it is that, computing on blockchain is kind of like imposing some laws of physical reality onto the virtual world. And so one thing that I also like to point out is that maybe thinking of writing software on Ethereum as software engineering might not be the most productive lens. In some ways, I think developing for a blockchain-based computer is more like building hardware than software. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. After all, we can build cars, we can build bridges, we can build skyscrapers, we can build space shuttles, the list goes on. So I do believe that we can build systems that are complex and reliable on blockchain. The key is that we're going to have to take approaches that are maybe more similar to the approaches that go into building complex real-world machinery and utilize different best practices. The key point is also that people don't start building cars like by using raw metal. They don't start building houses by chopping down trees. There's a lot of things that we need to build up along the way in order to improve the potential of what we can put together. The next perspective I like to take is the computing stack. This perspective was motivated by a question that a friend asked me, which was, what is the most interesting technical environment you've ever worked in? For me, actually, one of the most interesting technical problems I encountered was when I was 12. I built my own computer, and by built my own computer, I mean I got my parents to buy the parts that I could then assemble for a new computer so that I could have a shiny new computer and fulfill a school project. It was really genius by me, I think, in a lot of ways. This experience left me with a really strong memory that, hey, a computer isn't a black box. It's something that you can take apart. It's something that you can kind of assemble and reassemble and disassemble. That was a spark that never left me. Now, what's been fascinating to me since then is how few opportunities I've had to work with a new computer. Even at a place like Dropbox, which had pretty high technical requirements, there was desktop, web, and mobile support, the correctness requirements were high, the scalability requirements were high, the latency requirements were fairly high. But even there, most of the work was confined to a fairly narrow slice of the computing stack. There was never enough motivation, for instance, to build new programming languages, operating systems, or virtual machines. Now, with programmable blockchains, it's really cool to see not just motivation, but probably a need to reinvent the entire computing stack. For instance, no one's going to use a new programming language today unless there's a new context where it's especially well suited. Smartphones were the most recent example of that, and you could argue that some of the machinery used for AI is a form of that as well. But overall, you need to find new contexts in order to get to work on new parts of the stack again. Along similar lines, there's going to be a necessary redesign of the entire developer experience, one that's already happened a lot in Ethereum. And that comes with its own opportunities to make us dent and hopefully save us from unintentional bigger dents along the way. Overall, this is the first time in decades that so many parts of the computing stack are simultaneously accessible to be worked on in a practical context. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's interesting to think through points of history and what it would be like to be there. And I think what's exciting here is there's an element of being present for all of these things, the early days of the internet, early days of operating systems, and even the early days of computers themselves. I certainly wouldn't have guessed that building a truly new computer would make more sense today after so much development and adoption has already occurred than it actually would have when I was 12 years old, assembling that desktop box. But as exciting as all this is, it still misses what I think is a significant, perhaps most significant perspective on what we're all working on here. So for the next perspective, I'm going to take more of a legal or game theoretical or mechanism design perspective. As a prompt question, I'd like to ask, what is the purpose of the legal system, or any legal system? For a long time, I thought it was to enforce laws. I mean, after all, that's what it's there for, right? Eventually, I realized that a bigger effect of legal systems is that they establish or attempt to establish society-wide confidence that laws will be enforced. This is pretty significant because society-wide confidence that laws will be enforced shifts the equilibrium for how people behave at scale. And so speaking of equilibria, this means that the legal system is fundamentally an example of mechanism design. Now, people talk a lot about game theory, but I don't think they talk enough about mechanism design. mechanism design inverts the question of game theory. Instead of asking, how do we play this game to maximize our aims, it asks, how do we design the game so that when people play to maximize their aims, the result is better, whatever that might mean. Nakamoto consensus itself is kind of a breakthrough application of mechanism design thinking. Now, one of the most well-known examples and commonly cited examples of game theory in action is the prisoner's dilemma. Most of you are probably familiar with this, but for those of you who aren't, the key idea is that there exist situations where individually rational behavior results in arguably globally suboptimal outcomes. It's often cited as an example of the limitations of game theory. However, once you put on a mechanism design hat, I think it gets much more interesting. In particular, the prisoner's dilemma is actually solvable, just not directly. This is where mechanism design thinking comes into play. It's true that the original game yields suboptimal behavior, but we can also think, how do we change the game that's being played? Now, this isn't always going to be possible, but changing the payout matrix or turning the prisoner's dilemma into an iterated game instead of a one-shot game can both lead to substantial improvements in the outcomes for players. That leads to my next perspective, which is a deeper dive into credible commitments. I think credible commitments are a really underappreciated element of the world. They're almost like atoms in a physics-like sense. They're everywhere and their properties affect everything, but we also don't think about them directly very often. Commitments of varying levels of credibility are all over the place. For example, given the choice between buying a TV from a brand that you recognize and an otherwise indistinguishable TV that does not come with a brand, which one are you going to prefer? Brands are a form of credible commitment behind the quality of a product. They're in essence a form of proof of stake. And proof of stake itself is used as a form of credible commitment in addition to its main role of civil resistance. Of course, another form of credible commitment is just money itself. We all know that paper money has basically no intrinsic use. Maybe you can burn it for heat or it looks cool artistically, but that's about it. So its value is almost entirely tied to being a credible commitment, which encapsulates the authority of the issuer and the difficulty of counterfeiting. So one of the things that blockchains fundamentally enable is for a wider range of credible commitments to become possible. For example, anonymous parties can provide credible commitments using blockchains. Traditionally, this has required a mutually trusted third party, even though we don't always realize that it's there, the legal system, the government, or just your run-of-the-mill company. So let's consider a question that people both frequently ask and probably don't ask enough, which is, does this really need a blockchain? When people ask this question, I think they're really asking whether the increased space of credible commitments that are enabled by blockchain-related concepts is being utilized. Along those lines, just as how blockchains are fundamentally credible commitment technology, Ethereum is fundamentally an attempt to harness and leverage the potential of credible commitments. Ethereum enables making credible commitments more explicit, flexible, easy to use, and widely applicable. This is the crux of all programming blockchains, at least in my opinion, and it has some really powerful implications. For example, we've seen how Ethereum has made it possible to harness much more of the potential of zero-knowledge proof-based technology and applications than was previously possible on Bitcoin. It's one of the clearest demonstrations of where additional flexibility and ease of use can be leveraged. Taking the lens of credible commitments also shapes the way I think about the supposed transition from Web 2.0 to Web 3.0. I think that a lot of Web 2.0 will end up interfacing with programmable blockchains, but I don't think most of it is going to be outright replaced. One way I like to think about it is that computers didn't enable typing because we already had typewriters. Computers did enable spreadsheets and accessible internet for people. Similarly, smartphones were terrible at word processing and spreadsheets when they first came out, and they arguably still are, although it was even worse then. Some of you may remember you couldn't even copy-paste on the first iPhone. But smartphones did enable new default expectations. You can now default expect a lot of people to have connectivity, to have camera access, and location access. Ben Horowitz has an interview where I think he does a really good job going deeper into this that I think you can find on the Ethereum.org website. Along those lines, programmable blockchains are also going to get a lot better. But I don't think they're going to be better at these, quote, Web 2.0 things that Web 2.0 currently cares about, because those things have already been optimized for. Rather, programmable blockchains enable us to build with credible commitments in brand new ways. As we first saw with Bitcoin, money itself can be issued by a random anonymous person in Satoshi Nakamoto. This is a concept that would have been inconceivable before. Now, speaking of Bitcoin, it's worth noting that Ethereum's increased flexibility comes with an important trade-off. It also increases the surface area of risk. That actually can impact the credibility of the commitments on top of Ethereum. After all, if you're sure that a piece of code is going to run, but you're not sure that it's free of bugs, it might still not be that credible in your mind. This nicely segues into how Ethereum and Bitcoin attempt to harness credible commitments in different and complementary ways. Bitcoin doubles down on its core commitments and trying to make them as credible as possible by having a narrower, more immutability-centric focus. Now that actually comes with its own trade-offs. Just as the potential of bugs reduces the overall credibility of a commitment, the immutability of a system, even in the face of changing needs or security requirements, can also reduce the credibility of its commitments. There's no optimal point on this spectrum, just a series of trade-offs, and I think the world is likely a better place with both of these approaches being taken, as well as others. Now remember what I said earlier about the prisoner's dilemma. Ultimately, programmable blockchains aim to provide a new primitive on top of which new systems can be designed. You know, we might be able to use this to shift payout matrices, turn one-shot games into iterated games. Overall, it's just that with new systems comes new equilibria for behavior. Remember, when we're talking about the ability to do entirely new things, it's pretty hard to predict their long-term impact. You know, language was once a new thing, numbers were a new thing, legal systems, electricity, the internet, smartphones. The list goes on for things that, even if they looked big at the time, ended up being much bigger than we thought. And so with that, I view programming on top of blockchains as, well, there's a substrate for a new type of, quote, language, one that is built around guarantees instead of promises. And as some have noted, there's a hope that this would transform concepts like don't be evil into can't be evil. Now for my next perspective, I want to talk a little bit about the talent in this space. One claim that I've repeatedly made is that the amount of talent in blockchain is going to grow a lot. I was Dropbox's head of engineering hiring for a few years, and I spent about as much time on the recruiting side of things as I did on other aspects of Dropbox during those years. I would even make covert visits to other company offices to chat with people I was trying to poach, and did a lot of tours of college campuses. Now, there's a few concepts that I learned along the way for analyzing talent migration. The first one is that top talent wants to work with other top talent, especially when you get to work on challenging problems that also have an opportunity for impact. The second concept is that top talent is actually rarely looking for new opportunities. This is an important concept because there's this assumption that, you know, the best people are always in the most important fields. But that's actually not true, because the best people are often in a situation where they're very happy and therefore less likely to be exploring. Because of this, where top talent is often a lagging indicator. And so one question that I like to ask friends is, I know you're not looking for a change right now, but if you were, then what would you consider? Asking that question, I found, helps you learn a lot more about what might become more interesting in the future than asking people simply what they're doing right now. So yeah, like I said, top talent can be a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator of what's interesting. Along those lines, seeing one respected peer become interested in a new domain is probably worth more than 1,000 days of hearing about it otherwise. Actually, hearing about it repeatedly otherwise often has a counterproductive effect. And I think just like the startup world between 2008 and, say, 2012 or 13, we're seeing this happen increasingly often in crypto. When I started Dropbox back in 2008, the startup world looked nothing like it does today. I often like to call it Startup Village, because everyone actually knew each other at the time, and like certain villages, it definitely didn't feel modern, it definitely didn't feel developed. Back then, people thought you were crazy to start or join a startup, and when I told friends at MIT that I wasn't coming back for senior year, they reacted as if I told them I was going to like Hollywood to become a movie star or something. And believe me, nobody at MIT has what it takes to be a movie star. So by 2012, the narrative had begun to shift. You know, that's Drew, Dropbox founder, and 4 years later, he's on the cover of Forbes. Part of it was that the nuclear winter that had been left by the dot-com bubble was finally thawing. And move forward a few more years, the startup community really become the startup world. At that point, people would actually look at you funny if you said you would not consider ever going to a startup. Now, I think something similar is happening in blockchain, but like with many things in this space, it's going to take time, while also happening at warp speed before you know it. I think what ensures that the dam is going to burst is just how interesting this space is. Like, these aren't empty calories here. Most people do get distracted by unsavory, superficial aspects of, say, cryptocurrency speculation, but if you look at what blockchain-based computing is an interesting environment for, the list goes on and on. This is one of many reasons why I'm so excited about Ethereum's future. And so that takes me to my 8th and final perspective for this talk. Now, the word composability has gotten thrown around a lot in Ethereum land lately, especially in the context of decentralized finance. That got me thinking, what does composability look like in Ethereum across all levels? The first lens that I'm going to use is composability of the applications on the network or the applications on the global computer itself. Now, it's the year 2020, and people have been talking about cross-blockchain bridges for almost as long as blockchains have existed. Great progress has been made, but they're still pretty limited. And decentralized finance has been a great example of the importance of being kind of within one system. The recent hubbub about flash loans are a perfect example of this, because it's probably going to be hard to achieve total atomicity in a cross-blockchain way, and total atomicity is going to be irreplaceable in some contexts. And as flash loans have showed, total atomicity allows users to provide a type of credible commitment that is otherwise impossible. It's an example where the difference between being 100% sure about something and 99% sure is enormous. That said, I do believe most examples of the composability of applications will not require you to be on the same network, and we're all better off for that. There's going to be a lot more examples of that. I remember even at ETH Boston, there was work on using prediction markets to hedge against black swan risk, and we've had things like crypto dragons that consume crypto kitties, even though they're not actually built by the same people. The second lens focuses on tools, infrastructure, and standards. Now, every software engineer knows how valuable it is to not have to write your own programming language, your own IDE, your own code review tools, or even the most of your own libraries. You'd rather focus on the differentiated aspects of what you're trying to build while standing on the shoulders of others for everything else. And beyond tools, there's also infrastructure, such as not having to sync an entire node just to tinker. I'm not saying people shouldn't sync nodes in general, just that it's nice to not always have to do so. And browser and smartphone support is another example of that. Education materials, tutorials, and functional test nets are also a big part of it. Another thing that I think is underrated is standards. Now, standards often get associated with bureaucracy and bloat, but that's because we tend to only notice them once they make life harder. We don't notice the standards that have made life much, much easier. In my opinion, concepts like ERC20 or ERC721 continue to be underrated. They allow people from around the world to benefit from each other's work and get compounding leverage for their efforts. Even the simple fact that a token adhering to certain Ethereum standards is massively easier for an exchange, whether centralized or decentralized, to integrate, seems to be regularly overlooked by investors and pundits. For the third lens, I think things start to get really interesting. Once you actually have a vibrant ecosystem, magical things start to happen. Consider the following flow. Say that you discovered Ethereum somehow, and then you started to tinker with it. And maybe along the way, you decide to attend an ETHGlobal event. Now at the ETHGlobal event, you might have even built some cool stuff and met some co-founders, and so next up is to get some support for your new project, and as you can see, there's a long list of ways you can do that. And once you've been building it, you'll start to showcase your effort. Maybe it's through online groups, maybe it's through more in-person events. You might find other people that want to contribute, and you might even hire some of them. There's also stuff like Gitcoin bounties and other things that make it so that you can get help without always needing to make full hires. And that's where maybe you come full circle and you become an ETHGlobal sponsor. I swear they didn't tell me to put this slide in. But now you have even more builders, contributing to your project and maybe even meeting their own future co-founders, and the cycle starts again. Now, it might not work exactly like what's described here, but every single step in this flow happens and has happened surprisingly often. Look, none of this stuff is new by itself. Open source isn't new, composability isn't new, hackathons aren't new, and talent flow isn't new. But the way these things are coming together in Ethereum, I think, is quite special. Now, from my final perspective, since taking things full circle has been a bit of theme of this talk, let me take us back to one of the things in the beginning. I'd like to remind everyone that we should never be overconfident in our understanding, and to state once again that the moment we start thinking we actually know what's going to happen is the moment that we're at the highest risk. For example, the expanded space of credible commitment sounds really cool, but cool doesn't necessarily mean good. Similarly, I'd like to remind the folks in this room that almost everyone interested in Ethereum or blockchains today crossed an intellectual chasm to get there. I jokingly like to call this the acid trip epiphany that we all shared. Unfortunately, acid trip epiphanies don't scale. Usefulness is what scales. And so that's why I think it's really fitting to give a talk like this at an ETHGlobal hackathon. So with that note, I can't wait to see what happens this weekend, and I can't wait to see what happens over the next 5 years. Thank you, and have an awesome ETH London, everyone.
Thank you so much, Albert. That was amazing. I have taken so many photos of those slides that I might as well just ask Albert for the presentation. I have all of them. And I think that was amazing, mainly for me, where we've been looking at how people come into this ecosystem and their journey, and how easy we make it for them to come into the ecosystem, learn, build, and then support the people coming in to deliver the projects that we now use and love, and hopefully the ones that are going to come after them. So that was amazing, and I hope you were all as inspired as I was by the stuff that he was chatting about. Yes? Yes. Awesome. Okay, so now we only have about 20 minutes, and then you guys can be unleashed to hack. So, logistics. This floor is where the fireside talk tomorrow is going to happen with Vitalik and Joe. The workshops, as I mentioned, are to your left. You have some toilets up here, but actually downstairs is where you get water, refreshments, food. You have the chill space and more ample toilet room. So, just so you know that. Okay, on a serious note, again, like we said, thank you all for coming here and, braving the news and so on, but actually London is pretty low risk for now, but saying that, let's make sure we keep it that way. You all would have received an email from the ETHGlobal guys with detailed, precautions, but the main ones are regularly wash your hands, if you don't already. What is wrong with you? Please start doing that. Also, sanitizer is more abundant than water itself. It is on every table, at every corner. There is more at the help desk. Literally douse yourself in it. And also in your swag bag. More details if you are unsure about anything, if you're thinking, shit, should I do that? There's the link to see more tips and tricks. Official announcements. This is the Discord. Go there if you have questions, if you want to chat to mentors, if you can't find a team. This is where you ask all of the questions and hopefully find all of the answers. Join the conversation. As I mentioned earlier, you can ask questions for tomorrow's talk, but also we are going to have a lot of people sharing their experience at ETH London. I would love for you all to join our community. It is on Peepo. It's a video format that you can share. And on that channel as well, we will have hack tips provided for you guys literally throughout the weekend by the guys at Consensus Academy and the team at 1 Million Devs. If you have any questions, again, and you're not shy about showing your face, please ask them there, and somebody will hopefully answer them from the wider community, not necessarily people who are physically here. These are some things, we all love the internet connection at a hackathon. It's our second favorite thing after not being able to plug laptops in when we present our projects on stage. These are some of the things that you can do to keep us nice and connected and enable us all to have a wonderful time. So definitely no 4K videos or anything like that. Thank you very much. Secure your Wi-Fi. You can chat to the guys at Orchid Wave. There. So protect your VPN. They're our VPN partner. Go and chat to them. Let's stay safe. And then full schedule on the main website if you want to check any of the talks, any of the workshops, when you should be back here for our closing ceremonies, which will be equally as entertaining. Just check that. And again, we cannot, let you go about and hack without mentioning all of the goodness of prizes. Again, over 100K of dollars there, 20 plus companies. And we have Taurus is 2,500 British pounds. We have Diversify and Starkware, $5,000 US. Aztec, 2,000. Aave, 5,000 ADAI. DAP Hero is 1,000 DAI in prizes. Peepo is 4,000 DAI in prizes. ENS, $1,000. And then the Ethereum Foundation is going to have a special ETH 2.0 prize, which Peter here is going to tell you all about. Here he is.
Hello, everyone. So I'm super excited for this hackathon. Because with this hackathon, you'll not just be able to just hack on something. Now we have people from the Ethereum research team and from different client teams here over for you to hack and to learn about Ethereum 2. And so we have $5,000 US in prize money for the best 3 hacks. Split between the best 3 hacks. And so you can find details on hack.eth2.wtf. We'll have fun with the hackathon. There's lots of interesting stuff, challenges to look into. You can also do your own thing if you like. Just come talk to us, find us on the Discord, and happy hacking.
Awesome. Did everybody get that URL? Maybe we need to share. Oh, there you are. So the prizes, literally, this is where you find all of them. If you missed any of them, any of the amounts, that wonderful URL, it is all here for you to check out at your own leisure. Thank you so much. I hope you, oh yes, code of conduct. I'm just assuming everybody's super nice and wonderful. So be respectful. Harassment will not be tolerated. Let us keep the wonderful Ethereum culture nice and fuzzy and warm and wonderful, but use the sanitizer. If you're looking to join a team, we are starting a little mixer downstairs where I mentioned the refreshments and the food are, starting in, what is it now, like 10 minutes? So everybody in need of a team, go downstairs in 10 minutes, and hopefully we'll find you a wonderful team and you will create wonderful things together. And let's get hacking. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you.